Hey guys, Joseph here. Now, in this video, I'm actually going to be talking about one major thing. It's that which side gets better equipment and gear between the Allies and the Axis in Normandy. Now, of course, I know I haven't maxed out the Axis yet, so unfortunately I'm going to have to interpret this, but I'm pretty sure out of all of these you can interpret this. Now, I'm going to go from level to level, so starting at level 2 all the way up to level, because let's face it, level 1 you've got the exact same thing. It's an infantry squad, grenadier, it's the infantry squad here, the assault squad, and the sniper squads. And given that I haven't maxed out the snipers yet, but I've got the others maxed on both factions. Yeah, there's probably going to be a bit of controversial issues between the two. Now, I'm going to say one thing. I know I haven't maxed this, but I can probably interpret it based on my experience against the weapons, how much I've seen them, also the weapon stats, and I have used some of these as well. I have picked them up off the ground, so I have had some experience with them. But for the final thing, I'm not going to be including aircraft, so this means like level 24, level 27. I'm going to skip those levels entirely, because let's just face it, I don't like aircraft. I've made that. I haven't made that. I'm pretty sure I've made that crystal clear. I hate aircraft. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's go on to the first, and then we'll move on to, and we'll keep going. We'll start with level 2, then level 3, then level 5, all the way up until level 32. Level 32, yeah. So starting off, it's going to be a German unlock, actually, an Axis, which is the tankers. I think the tankers, especially the Puma, are much better for the Axis than the Allies. Now, I think, in my opinion, the Stuart is just a really bad tank. I pretty much use these as target practice most of the time for my tank. Now, I do the exact same thing to Pumas, don't get me wrong, but I think the Puma, the tank is a lot better. I remember back in the day, people were complaining about the Puma being too powerful, which was ironic, I think, given that later on in the tech tree you get stuff like the Jumbo and the Panther, which are miles more powerful than the Puma. But yeah, the Puma, I think it has better maneuverability with the because it's an armored car, but it also has some I think it has a more powerful weapon as well. I think it's got a 50. Yeah, it has a 50, whereas the Stuart only has a 37. It also has, I think, better armor, maybe, but yeah, you can see the armor for this thing will pretty much just die instantly with the Stuart. The Stuart armor goes down instantly, and the Puma's actually not that bad. Like, of course, a front round. Oh no, it has actually worse armor. Puma, of course, you can basically pierce this thing with a machine gun, but it's got more like a glass cannon. I think it's quicker as well, which is pretty good. Anyways, with that way, let's go on to level 3. So that's a markup for the Axis. Coming in for the better level 3, it's going to be the Allies this time. It's going to be, because the number 4 rifle is much better than the Mars. Now, the Mars isn't a bad rifle, of course. I don't think these are bad. Obviously, of course, I wrote videos on the Ross rifle being bad. I'm probably going to have one on the Mars and the Mannlicher. But I think the problem is that the Mars and the Mannlicher as well, they're basically, I think this one's a better rifle than the, I think it feels better. It is more of an accurate rifle, I think, and it's better than close range. But the problem is that the SMLE is just a much more, well, it's a, first off, it's a Lee Enfield. You're not going to go wrong with a Lee Enfield. You can never go wrong with a Lee Enfield. And 10 round magazine, there's actually some difference between the number 4 and the later rifles and the later bolt action, so there's actually some difference between them. Obviously, of course, the reload is much longer, especially if you're clocking it like multiples. If you've especially if you're clocking in multiple stripper clips. But yeah, I think this is a very good weapon, one of the better ones in the game, one of the better, probably the best bolt action in the game, although I know people will be saying the Winchester. So, anyways, I'm going to go on to level 5, of course, because level 4 is planes. So, let's go on to level 5. Coming in at level 5 is actually something which will probably surprise everyone. It's the M1 Carbine. Now, you might be thinking, the M1 Carbine? The M1 Carbine is crap. You've even said you're going to make a video on the M1 Carbine. Well, if you actually look at the alternative is the FNAB, which is a weapon that is immediately outclassed by the default weapon. I don't even use the FNAB. It's an awful weapon. The, whereas the Carbine, yeah, it's basically outclassed, but it has some use. You can use it in close range, and until you get the Grand, it's an okay side grade to the bolts. Obviously, of course, the Grand is much better, but again, for 2 levels, you're going to have a semi-automatic rifle, and you're going to get semi-automatic rifles before the Axis do. The Axis don't get a semi-automatic rifle until the Gavir 43, which is another fantastic weapon, which, of course, if it was the other way around, then it was the Gavir 43 against the M1 Carbine, it would have been the Gavir 43 all day, but the FNAB, not a good weapon, very bad SMG, awful rate of fire, and I think the only saving grace is you have a lot of ammo for it. Anyways, with that being said, let's move on to the next level, which is level 6. Now, for level 6, I don't have any, they're both good. Both the M1 Flamethrower and the Flammenwerfer 35 are both good. They're good, okay? They're good for flamethrowers, but again, it's really like, you can't cherry pick these. They're basically identical weapons here. So, unfortunately, I can't actually say which one's better. That being said, let's just go on to number 7. For number 7, again, I can't really say which one's better because the Gavir 43 and the M1 Garand are just both really powerful weapons. Now, obviously, of course, the Gavir 43 is one of the best weapons and will serve the Axis well until you get the SG-42 and start retrofitting your entire squads with them. And the Grand, you can use for the entire game, because let's face it, other than maybe the M2 Carbine, there's not really anything that replaces the Grand. The M1 Carbine with the grenade launcher is more like a flavor text option, like, yeah, just use this, you can use this, but yeah, the Grand, very powerful, one of my favourites actually. I really do like the Grand. It's an iconic weapon, and yeah, I think it's one of the best weapons in the game. Gavir 43 as well, very, very powerful weapon. But I think the Gavir 43 gets outclassed by the FG, whereas the Grand doesn't have that. So that being said, I am still going to keep this as a double. With that being said, let's move on to level 8. For level 8, it's the Piat. Now, you might have seen the video I made where I did destroy a Jumbo with the Sturm Pistol. You can destroy Jumbos with the Sturm Pistol. It's a myth that you can't destroy anything with the Sturm Pistol. But I think the Piat is just a more reliable anti-tank weapon. Now, Sturm Pistol's not bad. It's not a bad weapon, but the Piat is just so much more reliable for taking out tanks. You fire anywhere into, say, a Panzer IV, and that thing's going down. You fire anywhere into a Pit, into a Puma, that thing's going down. You fire the size of a Panther, it will be going down. Very strong weapon, very good weapon as well. The Piat. It's a spring grenade launcher, very strong. You can use it in buildings as well, which has a really strong rate of fire of 120 shots a minute, which I think is hilarious. But the Sturm Pistol as well, the problem is as well with the Sturm Pistol is the reload speed. This thing has a arse reload speed. Now, it has the lower weight, which I think is better, because you can and it is technically a flare gun, but it's still not as good as, say, like, look at this, you get the Faust. The Faust is just much better. And the Puma and the Piat as well is just so much better than the Sturm Pistol, which I think had this been, like, say, a boys AT rifle, it would be more comparable, but nah, or any other recoilless rifle. But the Sturm Pistol, just not really that good. And yeah, you can kill tanks, you can kill Jumbos with it, I know, I have done that. It's just that the Piat is more reliable. Anyway, let's move on to level 9. For level 9, it's the most iconic submachine gun for the Germans, the MP40. Now, Everyone knows why the MP40 is so good. It's got a really good magazine, good rate of fire, it's decent at long ranges, it has virtually no recoil, and it's just a really good iconic weapon. Now, the other option is the M3A1 grease gun, but I don't really like the grease gun at all. The MP40, you can use this thing until pretty much until you get the STG 44, and maybe even beyond that. Like, you could probably make an argument to use this over the MP43, but I think it's still a very strong weapon. Now for the grease gun, it's basically required for the Allies, because they don't get any good SMG options until the stem. They get no good close range options until the stem and the BAR. Well, the BAR is just a gun option. But with the Germans, of course, they have the MP38 and they have the FNAB, and this thing is just better than both of them, in my opinion. And really, you don't really get, like, the Bretta's is slightly better in the fire rate department. So, like, the Bretta's better in the fire rate department, and the MP35 what's it? I don't even know. Is it even better than the MP35? I can't remember. I've not used this in a long time. I think I picked it up a couple times off the ground and I liked using it, so it's fine, I guess, that one. And obviously, I would say, though, the Beretta Model 38 was much more fun to fire, and of course, this thing is just absurd. So, there will be options later on the line to replace it, but with the grease gun, unlike the grease gun, you're not going to be rushing to replace this, unlike the grease gun, where you're basically like, I need to get this replaced now. Anyway, so that being said, let's move on to level 10. Level 10, it's another German vehicle. It's the Panzer IIIN. Now, the N's not a bad tank, and, you know, 75mm, it can take on most tanks. It's more infantry support than, you know, say like the Panzer IV-J, which is more tank-on-tank combat, but this thing can fight tanks. The Stuart can't fight tanks really that well. Like, you can take down tanks with the if you hit them side on with heat or with the heat rounds, but really the Scott's just going to be much better at taking out infantry fortifications, and it's really just not an all-round tank. Whereas if you go up against, say, a Panzer III, which is bugged to hell, like, I generally have more problems taking out Panzer IIIs than I have taken out any other tank. Like, it's generally just, this thing's bugged to hell. You know, the Panzer III, of course, you really can't really hit this thing well, whereas with the Scott, for example, I've totaled this thing from front penning it with a Sturm pistol. I see a Scott, you basically just fire around through it and it's dead. You see a Panzer III, you have to pretty much just angle an explosive pack into its back crack, and then it's dead. So it's a lot harder to deal with. Anyways, let's move on to level 11. For level 11, it's gonna have to be the Bren and the Allies machine squad. Now, the problem is, the Breda is a pile of shit. It's literally, the Bren just won by default. If this was an MG34, you could probably have a bit of a competition here, but the Breda is a pile of shit. If you've used this, you know. Like, I remember one of my friends, they was like, it can't be that bad. And then he told me that, like, then he had a game with it, and he told me afterwards, he's like, you were underplaying how bad it was. Like, the Bren's a very powerful weapon. I've loved the Bren and the Gunner Squad since I first used it. And, you know, that's culminated in, you know, me loving weapons like the A1, like the A2, and like the MG34. I literally have never been more happy than when I got the MG34, because it meant that I didn't have to use this piece of shit ever again. I literally am never going to use the Breda anymore, not the Beretta. God, I am not confusing greatness with trash. here. God's sake. But yeah, the Brent, very, very strong, very powerful, and much better than the Braider. Also, is better at range, less kick, and let's face it, it's just better in all situations. Whereas the Braider can just go die. Anyways, let's move on to level 13. For level 13, both can go rot in hell. Coming in for level 14 is actually something I've stopped using now, which is the Sniper Geweers. Now, I only stopped using them because I've just gotten the Sniper 3s. But the Sniper Geweer is just a much better weapon than the Springfield A4. Now, the A4 I've of course made a video on, if you want to check my opinions on that. Check the annotation. But the main downside to this is it just doesn't really feel like an upgrade to the A1, whereas the Geweer feels like a pseudo upgrade or side grade to the scoped Kar 98K. Now, I'm not a fan of the bolt actions, of course. I prefer the semi-automatics. But I will say that the scoped Geweer is a very, very, very powerful weapon. Like, even in close range, you can literally just stop firing and just go bang. Is this a good spot? Like, it's just really... I think it's a really powerful weapon. Underrated as well. Like, the Geweer is a very strong weapon, but people just don't use it that often. Like, people rate up, like, say, oh, you know, the FG42 is really good, but you don't really say, hey, the Geweer is a really good rifle. Like, honestly, the Allies actually really do suffer at long ranges until they get the Grand. Because for every round that you've fired with this Springfield, the Axis with the Geweer will probably have 3 to 4 rounds heading your way. Doesn't matter if he keeps missing, one of them is going to hit it eventually. Anyways, let's move on to level 15. Now for level 15, I really don't have any opinion on this because both the A2 and the J are both actually very powerful tanks. Now, the J does have that bloody hand cranked turret, but if you get past that, it's actually a very powerful tank. And I've taken out Shermans with the J. I've taken out J's with the Sherman. They really are perfect. This is actually a perfect match. You know, you've got a very powerful tank with the A2, and you've got a pretty powerful tank with the J, and they can counter each other. This is actually probably a complete, true, neutral lineup. I generally can't say which one I like more. They're both really powerful, they both do a lot, and they're both actually just fun to use. Let's go on to level 16, because this one has no competition. Level 16 is 100% going to have to be the Beretta. Now, no competition here. The Beretta is so much more powerful than the shotgun. The Winchester 1912 shotgun, the shotgun, might I add, is so bad. Just why? It's generally, since they nerfed it, it has been god awful. And the Beretta is still a pretty decent weapon. Like, this thing, I often use it in lieu of the MP40, and it's a pretty powerful SMG actually. But I'm going to have to say it, compared to the shotgun, it is a godsend. Like, the Allies, this needed to be where the stem was. The stem needs to be here. Because Allies close quarter play is so restricted until you get to the stem. And you actually get an actual SMG. That using the Winchester is just awful. Anyways, let's go on to level 17, not 27, we haven't got to that yet. At level 17, it's going to have to be the Americans with the carbine grenade launcher, on the sole premise that I prefer the carbine. Now, I generally do like the carbine grenade launcher. It's one of my most... It's a weapon I've had the most fun with, probably. And let's face it, I would rather have this and semi-automatic option, which is a decent side grade to the Grand, over basically a Kar 98K again, just with a cup at the top that you can fire a grenade out of. I also really do like these grenades. They're just so fun to use. which is one of the main reasons I like the grenade launcher so much. It's a bit buggy, but it's still a pretty fun weapon to use. Let's go on to level 19. Oh boy. For level 19, I generally have no real complaints here. Again, like the A2 and the J, there's really no competition here. It's generally just two very powerful weapons. The BAR is, of course, the best close-range weapon for the Americans outside of the Thompson, and the MG34 is just really good, and compared to the Breda, needed. Like, I would say, I would probably put the MG34 here on the premise that the Allies don't really need the BAR at this point, because the Bren can fill this niche, but the Breda cannot fill what the MG34 does. In fact, the Breda can't even function as a machine gun. I hate using that thing so much. Anyways, let's move on to level 20, Battle of the Tanks. You knew this was going to be the pick for level 20. The Jumbo. I know you can kill this thing. I've killed this thing with relative ease with the Stern Pistol. I know you can kill it with the Panther. You can't really fight against the Panther well. But it's honestly one of the most powerful tanks. Most Allied players, most Axis players, actively say that this is the reason why that the Allies are overpowered. I'm like, dude, you've got FG-42s. I don't think having maybe one person in a powerful vehicle would change the tide of battle compared to, say, you having 9 gits with FG-42s running around. But yeah, the Jumbo just, like, it's designed to defeat tanks like it was designed to defeat tanks like the Tiger and defeat tanks like the Panther. So, obviously, of course, it's going to be very powerful. But, man, the thing has weaknesses. Like, stop saying, like, the Jumbo is invincible. I've literally made a video the prior day with me taking out a Jumbo with the Sturm Pistol, and I've done that multiple times over the past couple weeks. Like, I did, like, Quadro even witnessed me taking out a Jumbo with the Sturm Pistol while he was shit-mouthing the Sturm Pistol. Like, I know, a bit small ranty there, but yeah, pretty powerful, so let's move on to level 21. I don't even need to explain why. I don't even need to justify my choice. Just this. This thing. This thing is Satan. For level 22, I'm going to have to go with the stem. Now, the reason is, not that it's a better weapon than the MP35, because the MP35 is still a decent weapon, but because it's a needed weapon. Like, I remember I was talking about the BAR and the MP34, and I was saying, like, the MP34 was needed, but the BAR really is that powerful that it can actually probably hold its own against something that is essentially needed for Axis players. But the stem is the exact opposite. The MP35 is probably about as comparable with the stem, but the stem is just more needed than the MP35. The MP35, of course, you could just not use at all, because you can use, say, the MP40, you can use the Berettas. With the stem, at this point in the game, you can't really use anything else other than a grease gun, and the grease guns are shit. And yeah, I think this is just a really well-needed squad and well-needed weapon for the Americans and the Allies in general. So let's go on to level 23. Oh boy. I don't even need to say any more. For level 25, I think this is another tie, and it's a tie between the BAR again and the MG42. Now, of course, Hitler's buzzsaw is still incredibly powerful, and of course the BAR is still one of the most powerful weapons in the game. But I think this one has a little bit, they both have some reason to exist, like the slow firing of the A2, and of course the MG42 having a better fire rate. So I don't know, they're both really powerful weapons, so you can use, I reckon this is another tie. Let's go on to level 26 now. For level 26, I don't really have much to say because, again, the Lancaster and the ZK383 are both side grades really, and I think these are in uncomfortable positions because you're going to get a much more iconic, much better weapon in both cases. Like, for the Allies, you get the Thompson here, and with the Axis, you get the Beretta. So, really, these are just uncomfortable side grades. And of course, this was supposed to be used as a light machine gun, so maybe this one's better. I've not really seen them used much. Like the Lancaster I see every now and again, and it is decent. Like, it is a decent weapon. I'm pretty sure I use these in my tank squads. But I don't really see either of these being superior options to the other. So yeah, it's going to be another equals round. So let's go on to the level 28 because 27 is of course a fighter, and I don't use fighters. I hate to sound like a stuck record, but it's going to be another joint here because the M2 and the Flammenwerfer 41 are both just powerful flamethrowers. They both really do a lot of damage. Flame Trooper 2s are pretty powerful. They're fun to use as well. So, yeah, not really much to say. Fun flamethrowers to use and just a lot of power behind them. For level 29, this will sound a bit controversial, but I'm going to put the Thompson ahead of the Beretta. I love the Thompson. I made a video on why I think the Thompson is so good and saying, is it worth grinding? And I literally said, this gun is worth the grind. It is so fun to use. It is honestly just awesome. Such an awesome weapon. Iconic as fuck. And it's one of the few weapons I've actually had the privilege of holding. Like, I've actually held an M1A1 Thompson. It's a fucking heavy brick as well. Despite it being the lighter version. And it's just a really awesome submachine gun. The Thompson's just an awesome submachine gun. The Beretta as well is a very awesome submachine gun. I really love those the two triggers there. One being semi-auto, one being full auto. But I will say the Thompson is I think it's just a better weapon. Anyways, let's move on to level 30. For level 30, I'm going to have to go with the Panzerfaust here. Now, the Faust is pretty much needed. Now, the bazooka is powerful, don't get me wrong. I love the bazooka. But the Faust is just needed for the Axis because the stun pistol is so inconsistent. Now, obviously, of course, the stun pistol is still a very, very powerful weapon if you use it in the right circumstances. But the Faust is just so much better. And I think you can actually use this as, like, I've seen people use this as a shotgun in a way. Like, people said it's the best shotgun in the game. Ironic. But yeah, the bazooka, despite it being good and very comparable, I just think the Axis needed the Faust for the light anti-tank support. Anyways, let's go on to level 31. No comparisons here. It's the Panther. You just can't say why the Panther is worse than the M10. Now, the M10 is still very powerful. I've used this to death. It's a pretty powerful tank. But there's some things with the M10 which I don't like. The turret speed is shit. And really, you fire anything to the side of this thing and it will go up in flames. And of course, no coax machine gun is just awful. You have to literally stick your head out as a commander, and the commander's always exposed. So I don't like that. The Panther, on the other hand, is just a very powerful tank, and I just love the Panther. Of course, one of the best tanks of the war, one of the most iconic tanks of the war, and really just powerful in itself. Anyways, with that being said, let's move on to the final level, level 32. The final level, of course, being level 32, which, of course, I'm going to have to give it to the MP43, which is essentially an STG-44 at this point. Well, let's face it, look at this. Just look at it. Just you know, can you compare this weapon to anything else? Like, the Thompson as well, like, the M1 Thompson, of course, is, I think, is actually worse than the M1A1. The M1A1 is actually really good and comparable with this, so, you know, you can see I've got a lot of soldiers with Thompson. I do have M1 Thompsons among the ranks, but that is because I don't have enough, like this Thompson is more upgraded than this one, so it's statistically slightly better. Now, you can see here the real big difference is that it doesn't have as much firepower, but you can see the main difference with the Thompson here is that, you know, it gives a more fire rate than the other one, but I think this one's just slightly better. I will say though, this one does look cooler. I do think the M1 does look cooler. Anyways, I'm going to call this video here. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Like, comment, subscribe if you have. And I will see you guys in the next one.